Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. You are in for a treat. My guest today, I have this fascinating conversation. His name is Robert Mack, and he is an Ivy League educated positive psychology expert, celebrity happiness coach, executive coach, and he's also an author. He's one of the world's leading experts on the relationship between happiness and success. So he helps individuals and organizations really achieve that balance between authentic personal happiness, which is what we all want, and effortless professional success. Who doesn't want that as well? I was so fascinated by this conversation. I just felt like there were so many gems coming out of his mouth. He has a book also called Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment. He's been endorsed by Oprah, by Vanessa Williams, and many others. Please enjoy my riveting conversation with Robert Mack. I am so excited to welcome Robert Mack to the show. Hi, Robert.
Hello, how are you?
I'm so psyched and I'm doing great. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. So happy to be here.
Same, same. I'm so incredibly interested in the work that you do, book that you've written, but just positive psychology itself. I remember when it came out. I was already a therapist. I mean, because it's only been around maybe 15 years,
Right?
I'd say.
Yeah.
And I remember being like, I didn't even know it could be psychology because I always felt naturally like I leaned towards that, you know? So I was like, wait, this is, so I've done a lot of studying, although I'm not certified and, I don't have a degree in it per se. But I just find it super fascinating. And your story is also very interesting. So I just want to start, which I usually do, with just what happened in your life? Like what got you to be interested in this?
Unhappiness. It was unhappiness and suffering, I think, which is the case probably for most of us. I remember being unhappy and anxious and self-loathing from the very beginning of my life. I always thought I would grow out of it. You think, oh, I'll eventually make friends, hopefully, and I'll do well athletically and I'll do well academically. And maybe even someday I'll get a job and I'll make money and I'll have a girlfriend and it'll just go away. So I just achieve and accomplish, acquire more stuff. And of course, that didn't happen,
Mhm.
at least not right away. And it only got worse. So it eventually grew into a deep, dark depression. And then that eventually led to suicidal ideation, which went on for a solid 2 decades. And I used to think about suicide dozens of times a day, more than I thought about anything else. And what's odd is that my objective conditions and circumstances in my life were really pretty good, and that only made me feel more guilty about it, not being able to feel grateful for that. So eventually I came to a place where I decided to do some research. I decided I would slash my wrist. I got a kitchen knife and I rammed it to my wrist. And, something very strange happened in that moment, which is that, for no real good reason, at least I thought at the time, I felt this peace and joy and a sense of well-being that I hadn't felt before. And so, I thought that was odd. And I decided to postpone the suicide for like just 15 minutes at the time. And it eventually bled into an hour and more. Of course, it's been over 2 decades. But I just started doing some research. And eventually in that research, I discovered positive psychology.
Wow, that's just an amazing story. And I know that people who are listening and people who have read your book and people who are, in your world, so many people have struggled with suicidal ideations that are obsessive and that don't go away. Like you said, the objective circumstances of your life, it's almost like, and I understand the guilt as well, feeling like I've done all these things and I've got these things. Who am I to quote unquote sort of feel this way? And yet you did feel this way. So, as you found positive psychology, first of all, for people who don't know what it is, would you just
Yeah,
tell us a bit? Just give us a little nutshell.
for sure. So applied positive psychology is the study and science of what makes life worth living. So most business as usual psychology focuses on mental illness and dysfunction and weakness for good reason.
Mhm.
We want to make sure we're taking care of those things that are sort of below the sort of clinical line that are clinical issues. Positive psychology really focuses on what's right about people and signature strengths, character virtues. It's really about happiness and more than that, positive emotion, positive relationships. And so, the father of positive psychology, Marty Seligman, started his career really studying learned helplessness and depression, and eventually discovered that you can remove the dysfunction from human beings, but you don't get a thriving individual. You mostly just get a flatlining one. And so he wanted to talk and focus more on what was going right with people and how to leverage and exploit and optimize and maximize the good, the good.
Okay, so how for you, so what was the steps like when you first started discovering this? How was it for you? Were you focusing on like, okay, this like tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
your journey, you know?
Yeah, for sure. So as I sort of like started doing this research and discovered that, oh my goodness, I'm not alone. It's the first thing. I'm not alone here. There's lots of folks that feel depressed and suicidal and anxious and stressed and are self-loathing. And, I knew enough to know that I didn't know very much and that I could learn from smarter people that maybe had studied this their entire lives. So I didn't immediately find positive psychology. I
Mhm.
found Abraham Hicks, and I loved
Okay.
Abraham Hicks, and that was very helpful to me at the time. And then I found Eckhart Tolle, and then I found some scientists here and there, and then eventually I was led to positive psychology. But in the beginning, I think it was very simple for me in the sense that I came to a discovery that everything I was doing clearly wasn't working, certainly not in terms of subjective well-being and happiness and peace and all that good stuff. So I thought,
Mhm.
well, maybe I should at least explore the possibility of doing the exact opposite. It was like a Seinfeld episode, quite literally. I just thought if I'm not enjoying living here in Philadelphia, a beautiful city, but it was cold and rainy, maybe I should consider a warm city. I had a consulting job. I thought, well, maybe I'm not a corporate person. Maybe that doesn't work for
Right.
me. I had an incredible girlfriend and
Mhm.
she was just awesome, but we weren't happy. I thought maybe I should spend some time working on myself. And so I started taking these steps in the direction of what I thought could offer more happiness.
It's so interesting how, we sort of break down like how do we change our lives? That's really what you're saying. So you came up with a way of going, okay, this isn't working. Perhaps try that, which also requires a certain amount of being willing to be uncomfortable.
Totally, totally. I mean, it's such a great point, Terry. And this is, why I love the work you do, and I love the way you shine light on things like that. It was definitely uncomfortable taking those steps, and the only thing that was more uncomfortable than that was not taking them.
Yeah.
Right. So I think what really worked well for me was that happiness was a life or death proposition. I was crystal clear. It was like, I'm either going to live happily or not at all. And that kind of desire and earnestness is extraordinarily productive, and it facilitates a deepening of peace and love and happiness in a way that really nothing else can, because it's very single-minded about it.
What's interesting, your book, Happiness from the Inside Out, The Art and Science of Fulfillment, is basically this is what you're describing, right? That the external things, and I think that there are many of my listeners and viewers on YouTube who had the experience that you had that you were first describing, that we really do think, and in my own life experience, I just kept thinking the next thing, and if I'm running this talent agency, I'm going to feel this way. Or if I have this client, I'm going to feel this way. Or if I'm making this money, I'm going to feel this way. And I think that it's so important to shine a light on the fact that, and working with, highly visible clients, and I know you have as well, that highly visible, tons of cash, this does not guarantee happiness.
You can never get enough of what you don't really need. Right. And if you're going in the wrong direction, increasing your speed won't help. Right. So that was the discovery I had too, which was like, I don't have a Ferrari, but at the time I had two beautiful German cars, and I had, some money, and I had a great consulting job and a little bit of status around that. And I just thought, this is interesting because I feel worse now than ever. So you're absolutely right about that. Um, you know, we live often on this hedonic treadmill, and that's a term positive psychologists kind of really love, which is this idea that it's really a rat race, right? And the great thing and the tough thing about being human is that we're great at acclimating and adapting to practically anything, which means we can adapt and acclimate to the worst in our lives, but also the best in our lives. And so for that reason, you know, the achievements and the accomplishments and the acquisitions wear off, they fade with respect to pleasure and quote unquote happiness, right? So people are somewhat aware of that, but they often continue to underestimate how quickly the pleasure will fade from even the best of experiences or the most expensive purchase.
Indeed. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about happiness. So, what is happiness in your estimation?
Yeah. So happiness isn't what you do, although that's where I started. Happiness is like, the activities, and I thought it was that. And happiness isn't who you surround yourself with, although that's very helpful. It's not a status, not a lifestyle. Discovered that too. Um, at some point, I got to a place where it was like happiness is what you think.
Hmm.
Discovered the fallacy in that, even because if you go even the most positive thinking, often you'll find there's still an undercurrent of anxiety. And so I discovered there was a deeper happiness that wasn't what you do, wasn't who you surrounded by, isn't what you think, but is actually, in fact, what you are. So
Mm,
it's that feeling of peaceful aliveness that you experience when you're not lost in thought, when you're not thinking, and you're just being. And you can be rooted in that place of presence or being, even as you're doing, right? Even as you're thinking. But that peaceful aliveness is something that's always there, beyond, beneath, below, above, every single thought, every single feeling, every single experience. It's something that's faceless, formless, thoughtless, wordless, infinite, and eternal. And so it's not what you do, it's not what you think, it's what you are.
all right, so I want to just pluck out this phrase I love, peaceful aliveness. So, describe what does it mean to you to have this be your default emotional position in life, being peacefully alive?
Yeah, it means that your happiness, your peace is no longer dependent or contingent on anybody or anything else in the world. It never is, but we're sometimes seduced into believing that it is, right? And so then we route our happiness or our love or our peace through other people, places, or things. And so operating from a place of peaceful aliveness and beingness means that you can enjoy life and people all the much more because you're not addicted to them. You don't need them, or you don't believe that you need them in order to be happy, right? So finally, your love is free. Your freedom giving and freedom receiving, and it comes without an expectation of reciprocity. And you're free to chase your dreams and go after your goals and desires, but no longer with that needy, greedy, desperate energy that often pushes away the very thing or person that you so deeply desire.
So, with peaceful aliveness, when I was first reading your writing about it, there is this requirement of present moment consciousness. So, what I find from a therapeutic point of view is that there is a lot of my clients in the past have struggled with rumination, spending a lot of time in the past, catastrophically projecting into the future, taking themselves out of this present moment. So, would you share some ideas that you have about how can we flex this be here now muscle?
Yeah. So a couple things I discovered. I mostly discover things the hard way through failure, right? Yeah. And so one of the things I discovered is that it helps to have faith in the present, not just the future. And without faith in the present, it actually is very difficult to be present because you always think that you're the CEO of the universe, that you have to work out everything in advance. And that can be debilitating in terms of enjoying the present moment. So the first piece is like remembering that if you take care of the present, the future will take care of itself, right? Or another way to put it is if you take care of the present will take care of the future, right? And so in order to do that, of course, you have to really want to be happy more than you want anything else and anybody else in the entire world. And if you can kind of look into your life, both the past and the future, and notice the ways in which everything you've strived for in your life has really been a striving for and after happiness ultimately. So success. The only reason we want success is because we think it'll make us feel better for having had it. So we're after a feeling, and that feeling is what I call happiness.
Mm.
Same thing with relationships, love, right? We're after a feeling, and that feeling that we're after we call happiness. And so if you can kind of come to a recognition that the greatest success is happiness, and the greatest love is happiness, and the greatest achievement is happiness, then you can stop postponing and procrastinating on this happiness thing in the future and just seek it right here and now. And so the way that I do that often is just simply reminding myself of that. But more deeply than that, practicing what I might call presence, or sometimes I just call it a micro meditation. But it's
Mm.
simply one breath, just one breath. And the idea is to pretend like it's the last breath you'll ever take on the planet ever again. So you want to juice it for as much joy as humanly possible. And you want to do that, and you can do that best by letting go of all your thoughts, concerns, dreams, plans, and hopes, and just diving in to the depths of that peaceful aliveness. You just do it like it's the last breath. And if you can do that, even while you're doing something else, while you're Swiffering or folding clothes, you'll discover with enough practice, you'll rewire your brain for a much more present moment orientation to life.
I love the idea. So what do we call them? Micro meditations?
Micro meditations, they're just one, everybody can do one breath.
You can. And I think that it's such a beautiful place for anyone who's listening or watching to start, where it feels like so much of this can feel so overwhelming, like it's too many things, but it isn't too many things. What if we said it was just this thing right now? Making that shift, this is a power pivot towards shifting the frame with which we are seeing our lives. That breath, that micro meditation of one meaningful. And let's do it. Ready? You're listening, you're watching, just close your eyes. Drop your attention inward. And then are we just breathing?
Yes, just breathing in through the nose from the stomach or diaphragm, and really not to get it right, only to enjoy it.
All right, let's do it. Makes me want to do it again.
Exactly. And that's the idea, right? It's like, it's amazing. I love the word blisscipline, right? Like replacing discipline with blisscipline. Like,
Yeah.
I want to be committed to bliss, and I want to do everything I can to enjoy everything I do more. And I've discovered I can mostly do that if I let my mind quiet down a little, get more in tune with my body, and maybe even more in tune with my inner body. It's amazing how much you can more deeply enjoy everything and everybody.
So let's talk a little bit about the connection that you write about happiness and success.
Yeah, so most of us intellectually understand and accept that success won't make you happy. We see lots of celebrities and other public figures and very wealthy people that are depressed too, or anxious too, or suicidal as well. And so we intellectually get that, but viscerally, sometimes at a guttural level, we don't always fully integrate that into our daily lives. And so sometimes leaning into science helps to let it sink down into the heart. But so science has found that success doesn't lead to happiness. We do know that if you're living below a level of subsistence, meaning you can't pay for basic utilities or basic needs, more money is going to help you live a more comfortable life. Okay, it's going to increase your satisfaction with life. And once you reach a level of about $75,000 or so, you start to experience the diminishing marginal utility of the dollar, which means you get less happiness bang for each additional buck. And at some point, you completely flatline or level off. And so that's the first piece to understand, is that success doesn't lead to happiness. And the other part of this is that happiness does lead to success, however, which is interesting. So that means that if you can find a way to get happy without all the stuff or things you want, you tend to get all the stuff and things you want, most of which is happiness itself, right? And so we've got lots of data to support that. So happy people live 6 to 7 years longer than their unhappy counterparts. They make $600,000 to $700,000 more on average than their unhappy counterparts. They get married earlier, stay married longer, and are happier in all the relationships, whether they're married or not. Because let's face it, it's not about marriage, obviously, right? They experience less job burnout, all these things, right? And so happiness leads to successful life outcomes. And so the way I often say it, so people can remember it, is happiness isn't only the greatest success, meaning it's the reason we want success, but happiness also leads to traditional forms of success. So if there was ever a lazy, intelligent shortcut to getting whatever you wanted, it's finding a way to get happy now.
Wow, that is deep and true. And yet I think that a lot of people listening may say, I don't know how to do it, even though we've already talked about some ideas. So what would you say if someone says, how can I increase my level of happiness now?
So I'd say there's probably a 4 or 5 pronged approach to that. I'd say, first of all, reach for the low hanging fruit. So start where it's easy. So this is with the idea that happiness is what you do. So create what I call a happiness islands list. Those are people, places, things, and activities that allow you to feel inspired, uplifted, happy to be alive with very little time, energy, or effort. List those things out. You want to find a way to schedule those things into your life more consistently. As part of that, you can also identify your happiness valleys or deserts. Those are people, places, things, or activities that drain you. They don't energize you. They make you feel maybe discouraged or less happy to be alive. You want to do everything you can to outsource, delegate, reduce, eliminate, automate, or regulate all the valleys or deserts. Okay. So
Hey,
that's
can we stop for a minute? I want to stop for a
yes.
minute because this is so good. And I really want you guys listening or watching to think about. So what Robert's saying is you're taking an inventory in a real way of what are the things that bring you joy. He called that the low hanging fruit. And what are the things that like suck? And like, that's like the friggin' desert of no happiness in there. Right. So there's, I find in my practice, I'm pointing this out because I find that this sense of obligation and this to do things the way they've been done, I find with my clients, many of them high functioning, highly capable women, there's like this never ending to-do list. And like a whole bunch of crap on that list is definitely desert material. Like there's no way it's making you feel good. And yet, if you unconsciously have it in your mind that a good mother or a good partner or a good friend or whatever does these things, even if you dislike these things in that moment, and I'm not saying, listen, a kid is at ballet and has got to be picked up. You might dislike it, go get her because you need to do that, right? Like we're not talking about with minor children, obviously, you're taking care of them. But when you're doing this, if you're taking Robert's advice, and I hope that you do, and you're doing your inventory, that you get really honest with yourself about where can you delegate things that really suck your energy, even if other people like them, or things that you don't enjoy, bring you the opposite of happiness, realizing that you don't have to do them all. And that there is a way, and you said, to delegate, to automate, like there's all different ways of being like, this takes time to write out checks. I always have this with my husband, like he just like loves the old school thing, where I'm like, no, and it took years to sort of switch it over. I'm like, I get it, and it makes zero sense. And listen, if you enjoy it, that's one thing. If you're just so habituated, and this is just like a deep neural pathway, and maybe there's comfort in that familiarity. Maybe this is how you became, I mean, of course, we talked it out and worked it out because you're not married to a therapist for 25 years without having, he's had a ton of therapy himself. But I think I'm asking those of you listening or watching to really think about what motivates you to do the things that are on the these things suck list, because there's so much that I've found with my clients that really can come off that list. And it's just, I just wanted to shine a light on what you were saying, Robert, because it's so valuable. that alone can change your level of happiness. The small things can change it. In the one of the activities I have people do in the book is this massive okay and not okay list, basically before we even get into anything else. Because on that list, you might have lighting that is harsh that you don't like in a room in your house. And every time you flip that light on, you have a thought of like, oh, this is like a low vibration. This is like a constriction, a negative feeling about it. You could just change that friggin' bulb. You could just decide you don't like that light and get floor lamps or whatever. You could do something, because think about it. And I've done it. Listen, we've all done it, where gone into that same friggin' room 4,000 times, had the same friggin' thought 4,000 times, and still sat on my ass and did nothing about it. This is if you are motivated by this conversation to want to increase your actual happiness, I really want you to do what Robert is saying in a real way. Take the time to be like, what are the things that are just sucking the life out of you and bringing you the opposite of joy, whether it's frustration, because there's a lot of things I think that can kind of go into the category of being the opposite of joy. All right, go back to what you were saying. I just wanted to point that.
Impeccable. And so one of the things that is for sure on most of our happiness deserts or valleys list is people pleasing, right? And so much of it revolves around the people pleasing. And so it can be tough because we often feel like we have to please 8 billion other people on the planet before we can please ourselves, or in order to please ourselves. That is a long, indirect, scenic path that is not very productive, right? For anyone. Because first of all, we don't do a good job of pleasing them. That's why they continue to complain and ask us for more. And second of all, it doesn't make us lastingly and abidingly and meaningfully happier. So you want to address that. And that can be tough to kind of untangle, and you might need help with that. But one thing that is very helpful to remember is that you can love people sometimes even more purely and more deeply from a distance. You can do that, right?
Absolutely.
The other thing to remember there is that happiness is your gift to the world. And so it sometimes requires an increasingly selfish approach to become authentically unselfish in the end. Meaning, we know that people who prioritize their own happiness and are self-loving also end up automatically becoming more charitable. They donate more money and blood and time and energy. They're kinder, and also doing those things increases their happiness. But you want to come from a place where you can do it without an expectation of reciprocity. And you can only do that if your bucket is full, if you have something to share, right? So I'll say that. So that's the first piece, and sort of second piece, which is like, happiness is what you do. Try to do things that bring you happiness and not do things that don't. Happiness is who you spend time with. So do what you can to eliminate the energy vampires, or at least reduce your time with them. And then you come to the third place, which is happiness is what you think. And that's really about vetting thoughts, not based on whether or not they're true, but based on whether or not they're helpful. There are lots of things that are true in the world, in your life, and about yourself. And thinking about them will not improve your life, and it won't improve how you feel either. And so continuing to ruminate about them will only make it harder to improve your life and enjoy yourself. And so one way to talk about that is learn and practice telling better feeling stories based in truth, about everything and everybody in your life, starting with yourself. And you want to make it a practice. You want to practice it until it becomes automatic. And it will start to become automatic. 21 to 66 days is what all the neuroplasticity research tells us.
So how many days?
Between 21 and 66 days. So if you practice something consistently for that period of time, you actually rewire your brain to do it in a much less effortful, more enjoyable way.
What I love about what you just said, and I think is amazing, is about the whole telling better stories, telling ourselves better stories, but also focusing on better stories, because we know we have the negativity bias. We know that as humans, right, we are wired to remember the crappy stuff because it's potentially kept us alive many moons ago. And so we have to, especially depending on how you're wired, but I find with my clients There are some people who we really all have to work harder to hold on to the good. But what you said about the stories reminds me about telling better stories, or telling the story the way you want the story to be, and not in like um, a fake way or like a totally diluted denial way. Is it's very the first time I ever heard that years ago, that notion, I want to say 2 decades ago, because they've been around forever, is from Abraham Hicks, right?
That's right. That's right. Love Abraham Hicks. And I'm sure that's probably the first or one of the first places I heard it from as well. And it was a game changer, because the mind can make a heaven out of hell or a hell out of heaven, right? I mean, you can live literally in heaven or in utopia. And if there's a pothole on Main Street and you focus on it to the exclusion of everything else, that heaven or utopian experience will feel like hell, and vice versa, right? And so we don't realize that. We don't realize that our perception and our experience of life is constantly being filtered. We don't take in everything all the time. We're actually very sort of laser focused in ways that are often based on programming, conditioning, and just practice that we put in the past, right? And that's why we often see things in a negative way or toxic way or an unsupportive way. And so we want to clean that up and be a lot less sloppy and a lot more disciplined in the way in which we focus and what we focus on and the stories that we tell ourselves and others. I think it was in a Course in Miracles, which I love so much, which said something like, you accomplish so little because of an undisciplined mind, and that we're much too tolerant of mind wandering, right? And so the idea there is just be your own best friend and your own best advocate, and focus on the parts of yourself and life and others that makes you feel good when you focus on it, right? There's nothing perfect and nobody perfect in life, but you can focus in a way that makes you feel increasingly happy, at peace, and loving. And isn't that what we need more of in the world?
When you think about it, yes, I will answer that and say it is what we need more of in the world, Robert. When you think about it, in relationships, in long-term relationships, this whole thing also applies, in that every day we have choices. We can focus on the things that annoy us. We can focus on the things that bring us joy. And I think that there is something, happiness in a relationship, because I've been in a very healthy, happy relationship for a long time, has to do with having a more disciplined mind and deciding, right? I'm going to focus on my partner's strengths. And it doesn't mean I won't have boundaries, of course. Obviously, I will, or I will tell the truth about how I feel, but I can control what I focus on. And if your partner were exactly like you would most likely not be partners, you know?
You have just absolutely nailed it. That's exactly right. When I was in undergrad, I studied positive illusion. And positive illusion is this experience that we all have where, for the most part, everyone thinks they're a little bit better a writer than the people around them, or a little bit better driver, a little bit better looking, right? And it's interesting and funny. And most of us feel kind of sure about that. And that actually is a very healthy way to live your life, surprisingly enough. They found that depressed people were actually wiser, or not wiser, much more accurate in their judgments of, like, say, control and ability than happy people. But of course, they're depressed. So how well is it working, right? And so when it comes to relationships, it's especially true. And again, it's not about pasting smiley stickers on empty gas tanks. It's not about faking it. It's about being intentional and strategic and deliberate about how and where and what you focus on, right? And so I remember seeing a study that essentially found that the happiest relationships consisted of two people who each saw their partner better than that partner's five best friends in more positive light, right? Now, you could argue it's the same person. How can everyone experience that person differently? Well, they set up an intention to do just that. And we can all do that, right? We can all do that.
Yes. And also the growth in relationships. I would always say to my clients or my friends, like, we really, if you are really want to be happy in a relationship, partnering with someone who in a way inspires you to be a better human being than you would have been had you never met them, had you never been with them, That is interesting. Being with someone who is curious, who's doing their own work, but back to your point, how they relate to you. Do you hold your partner in high esteem? Yes, important to hold yourself in high esteem as well, but thinking about, if we're talking about happiness within a relationship, that it's so crucial that you hold your partner in high esteem if you want something to last, you know?
Oh, so good, Terry. It's the way I think about that too. You just really highlighted this, which is that when your partner and you are both on a path, personal development path, personal growth path, spiritual path, but something that's intended to maybe raise your consciousness awareness, really your happiness. Don't even need to complicate it. It's just happiness. When you're serious about that, intentional about that, then instead of a relationship being full of projections, where you each pick up the magnifying glass every time something goes wrong, where you blame each other, you pick up the mirror and you say, well, I wonder what I could do a little differently to support my partner in that. And then she or he does this same thing. And then you find that you experience this positive upward spiral in your experience. I think the challenge with most of us is that we get into a relationship hoping and thinking and believing that relationships are designed to make us happy, when they're really designed to make us aware. And as we become more aware, we become happier. But they're not there to make you happy. They can enhance your happiness.
Yes.
But your happiness is your job. My happiness is mine. And we don't want to get that confused.
So true. I do think that it's important that we talk about these things, because there are so many myths and illusions, speaking of illusions, out there about healthy love and what it looks like. And I mean, obviously rom-coms haven't helped, and fairy tales haven't helped, and all the shit we've heard and listened to for the past, I don't know, 150 years hasn't helped. None of it has helped. And yet the taking responsibility, why I always like the 12-step program, and there's different places, even Stoicism. I love, my husband just did a book with Ryan Holiday on Stoicism. And in reading, so every morning he'll read, or every night he'll read, what was that day's, it's like a daily thing. And Stoicism is very much about, right, controlling what you can, controlling your mind, being disciplined, and that how it's easy for us to waste our lives, or sort of fritter our lives away by not controlling our thoughts.
Exactly. I love Stoicism. I love Stoicism. Epictetus, one of my favorites. I read Seneca. Still, one of my favorite books of all time is The Art of Living by Epictetus and Sharon Lavelle. And also Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. It's just still a top 10 list for me. And I was reading a book a day for years. So you're absolutely right about this. At the end of the day, judgment is really the thief of joy, right? It's judgment, whether it's self-judgment, judgments of others, judgments of life, judgment. And we can control that, right? We can control that.
We can, and it takes work too. So, but I love how much you've shared. I have two questions I ask every guest, so I'm going to get to them now. And then I want to ask you where everyone can find you. But what I love about your work, Robert, and I just so appreciate you coming and spending so much time, is that for anyone who wants to be happier, who finds it confusing, who says, I just come from a family, we're just like this, we're moody, we're not, we're whatever, that this is a place to start. We've outlined in this episode things that are absolutely doable this moment. We all just took, right, a micro meditation together by taking one meaningful breath. So get Robert's book. All the info that you need is going to be in the show notes, but follow this man. He is literally laying it out for you. He knows your pain. If you are someone who has been through hell and back, read about Robert's life, like you just shared with us, Robert. But it's amazing for you, for where you are, to know that you're not just like, well, I'm sure it's painful to have that experience. You've had these experiences. And I'm just so grateful that you're here and that you're sharing, because I know that this is going to help so many people. Moving on to my two questions. Personally, what has your been most challenging boundary struggle, and how did you overcome it?
Love these questions. So my greatest personal boundary challenge has been people pleasing in general, okay? And especially with folks that are really hurting and in pain, right? So when I became a coach, I thought I had kind of worked on that, and I suddenly discovered that I need to dive deeper into that. So that's been my greatest challenge because I don't like to see people suffer, and I don't like to see people in pain. And I always want to rescue them from that. I've always been challenged by this savior complex kind of idea, right? Because I think partly I've always wanted saved, right? And so that's been the greatest challenge. I think what's helped me address that and navigate that is a couple of things. One, I love Ramana Maharshi and I love a lot of the non-duality teachers so much. And they helped me come to an understanding that, first of all, the greatest help you can offer others is your own happiness and peace. Right? That's the first thing. Second, unsolicited advice is the only thing freely given and never received. And every piece of advice I've ever given is really meant for me. But I think it's really ultimately, for to sum it up, it's just remembering consistently that happiness is my gift to the world and that I can show people better than I can teach them or tell them. And if I'm not happy and at peace, and I'm out there, somebody else's business trying to fix or solve, and I'm out of integrity or alignment with myself, I can't be of real, meaningful, and lasting, and abiding help to them at all. It will only just be a band-aid. And so I'm reminded over and over again that my job is me. And if I can live as a shining example of happiness and peace and self-love, I'll be a much greater help and support in the world. So that's allowed me to sort of stick to my very loving but firm boundaries around people that are in need and suffering and hurting.
Wow. All right. So you basically answered both questions in one question, which was
Yeah.
perfect. I loved that answer. It's so very true. The advice stuff, people are like, yeah, thanks for nothing. Anyway, they're not taking your advice. Like, why do we continue to do it? I mean, I don't anymore, but I certainly did for decades. And it's exhausting. Tell folks where they can find you.
Yeah. Terri, I want to just first say I appreciate you so much. I have been such a fan and follower of you and your work for years. And it's such a pleasure and honor and privilege to be connected with you in this way. So thank you for what you do. Most of all, thank you for who you are. I mean that. Yeah. So if folks are interested, you can find Happiness from Inside Out everywhere great books are sold, including Amazon and Barnes and Noble. You can find me at my website at coachrobmack.com. And you can find me also on all social media platforms, most notably Instagram at Rob Mack, M-A-C-K official.
So great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We will have to do this again.
I'm down.
You know it.